Well, basically, we have different levels of measurement. When we think about measuring organizational climate, we really aim to quantify human factor risks as part of the strategic intent of an organization. And what it really means is we try and diagnose the root causes of what prevents people from executing on the strategy. At lower levels in the organization, we also measure work well-being. And the format of this is really quite simple. It's a simple survey, but a well-constructed survey with scientific validated instruments and proper survey design behind it. On average, taking about 20 minutes or so for an employee to complete that. So once they go through the process of completion with really well encrypted data security protocols, we generate reports from the system, and of course we then embark on feedback sessions with, normally we start with the exco of an organization, just to give them a high-level overview of what the organizational state looks like. And from there, often we embark on focus groups to deep dive some of these root causes. And what we like to do normally is to co-create in a facilitated way solutions that are worth the while and fit for purpose for particular departments. And through the process, of course, we are able, through the data analytics that we use processes like structural equation modeling as an example, to pinpoint and put together the root causes of the outcomes, of employee outcomes for particular departments, which means we are able to focus our attention on what matters most for that particular department. And in doing, of course, we avoid vanilla flavor, one size fits all kind of interventions. And that's kind of the process. What we often then do is we often do a longitudinal study. So we'd finish an organization, bring the diagnostic instrument, lay down a baseline, and about a year or 18 months from that time, after the interventions, we will remeasure again, follow the same process to see if there's been a return on investment for the survey and the interventions. That's the process.
Okay, but is it actually possible to prevent or manage burnout amongst employees?
Well, I guess that, yeah, the answer is yes, most definitely. But it's I think there's a dual responsibility. First, from an employer's perspective, what drives burnout really is the balance between resources and demands placed on employees. In other words, if employees have adequate resources, both physically and psychologically, they are, naturally able to deal with demands placed on them more effectively. So I guess that's the one part. And the organizational management normally are quite, it's easy for them to create a roadmap based on some diagnostics on what are the root causes of burnout. And the essence of it simply is the provision of adequate resources so that people can cope with demands placed on them. At an individual level, that's of course the other accountability. It's important for employees to learn to say no, to draw their own boundaries. And I think that's particularly prevalent in a COVID environment where we find a blurring of lines between work and home, and to really learn the skills of actually managing boundaries more clearly and learning to say no to things and maintain work-life balance. Because often it is when the resources are being eroded over time when burnout starts to appear on the slippery slope of employee well-being.
Okay, well, who are the most important role players in the well-being of an organization?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think I want to start off by saying the executive of an organization, we know this to be true, are normally the people that sets the culture of the organization. And so the true beliefs of how they think about well-being, mental health, and job resources, as an example, is an important attribute at exco level. So I think that's where it starts. It normally helps if the measurements we do, like you see on the screen here, are driven by the HR department. It also helps give them a proper seat at the executive table rather than just being tolerated there, if I may say it like that. And of course, it also provides a roadmap for the HR executive to really inform the exco on the risk factors that affect their strategic intent. And of course, having knowledge of what the root causes are in a prioritized way, they're able to actually develop a roadmap that helps them execute on this, and so smooth out the risks of human factor execution capability. And so what you see here is it essentially comes down to creating a balance between the resources that employees have available for themselves and the demands placed on them. And maybe just to say something about that, when we talk about demands, these are not just physical workload demands, which really, of course, means that employees do have a certain pace and amount of work they have to perform on a daily basis. But needless to say, they also deal with complexity. So there's also cognitive load that needs to be catered for. And needless to say, also in difficult work environments, there's a thing called emotional load, which often also becomes an energy drainer for employees. So it's these demands that needs to be facilitated with adequate resources, both physically, in other words, the right amount of work, the right kind of skills and competencies, the right leadership, the right kind of relationships that supports high performance, adequate performance management systems, a sense of career path and growth, a sense of being able to grow and learn in the organization. So there are many attributes that also helps bring about psychological resources for people to deal with difficult work environments. And so we balance the resources with demands in that way. And I think if this model is entrenched at EXCO level, it provides a nice framework to measure and manage the strategic intent capability of the organization.
You have mentioned the human factor risk in presenteeism and absenteeism and the productivity. Do you have the latest statistics or impact on the South African economy?
Yeah, a lot's been written about this, I dare say, and not just in South African context, but also by the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum. But if we translate the figures into South African terms, the latest statistics equates to about 232 billion rand per annum, which is the actual cost of workplace stress and mental issues. This equates to about 5.7% of GDP, which is quite a horrendous figure. When we translate this specifically to illnesses that are stress related, this equates to about 16 billion rand per annum. And in that case, we can say that about 40% of illnesses are the result of work-related stress, depression, burnout, or anxiety disorders. So at a global level, of course, I want to say that this is statistics from the World Health Organization. Depression and anxiety relating to stress-induced work environments are currently standing at about 23%, which is a really high figure. And in South African terms, if we translate that to performance locally, that equates to about 5% of gross operating profits per annum. And this is according to the Momentum Effectiveness Employee Index. So it's really quite shocking statistics and monetary losses involved.
Are you able to put an actual number in savings to a focus of well-being, if it is a priority to a CEO or business owner?
Absolutely. So when we spoke about the process earlier on, part of the data analytics that we import into the survey instruments does contain salary bands of employees. And that in a way translates to, when we think about productivity losses indexes, and also presenteeism and absenteeism rates, equates to physical productivity losses. So we use the salary bands to calculate the actual cost of mental health, of presenteeism. We calculate the cost of decision-making errors, accident proneness, and things like that. So it's very easy for us, not just to actually pinpoint this in rand cent terms, but also to pinpoint where exactly in the organization things are going skew and what the root causes of that is.
One of the latest buzzwords in mental well-being is mindfulness. Why would mindfulness be an important tool to empower an organization's employees with?
Yeah, that's also an interesting question. And certainly it's true to say that mindfulness is becoming a buzzword, but there's also some practical things about this. And it's about just not getting usurped into the mechanics of an organization. So when people start to know they've got choices to make, and they've got the freedom to choose different responses to demands placed on them, that in itself is an empowering thing. And I think some of the tools available for practicing mindfulness also means that employees are able to think about what is driving their own well-being, as an example. What are the mental models that sits underneath the waterline, that sits at almost a subconscious level for them, that helps them understand not just that they behave in a certain way, but what the root causes of that are. And once you become aware of these mental models, it's easier to, let's say, reformulate a plan and find new strategies and different behavior responses to the demands placed on us. And that's pretty what it is about. So it's about applying the mind in a disciplined way, I guess, to practice mindfulness in a way that it brings more well-being, as an example. And there's some processes involved that actually helps them also reduce their stress in the process. So, but it's a choice they have to make, and it's a willing and a deliberate choice and direction they have to take by being mindful of why they behave in a certain way and what they believe about their own wellness. That really becomes instrumental for them to support them.
Is it possible to develop a roadmap for optimal workplaces? How do you start developing this?
Yeah, I guess it comes back to the diagnostic instruments. So once you know the root causes of, let's say, a distressed organization, and you have the ability to distinguish what, where does it come from, and specifically so in different departments and sections of the demographics of the organization. The work we do in the statistical modeling connects for us the covert and overt root causes, which then becomes prioritized focus areas. And that means, of course, that if you implement these things, it becomes an easier way for organizations to manage not everything that needs to be fixed, but the things that has the biggest impact on mental well-being and, of course, optimal workplaces. And when we think about this, this is really the building blocks between job resources and job demands. And these constructs are well researched. I want to say that it's been coming through many years of academic research through places like Professor Arnold Bakker and Schoffelli from the Erasmus University in Rotterdam. So it's a collaborative international effort that brings about these root causes. And of course, I want to say this because it's important that we follow a science practitioner model. These are not thumb-sucked items just because we think they're cool things to measure. These are well-validated building blocks of that. And so this is how we go about doing it.
Ryk, if you could give 20-year-old you some advice, what would it be?
Well, that's also an interesting question. I think I would, if I reverse my own journey, I think it's about how we build habits. It's very hard. And I guess the older we become, the risk is that our neuroplasticity starts to diminish. So I guess in a way, it's easier for young people to start building good habits, and particularly so well-being. And when I say well-being, I mean the holistic way of doing this. And that includes not just the physicality of sleep and healthy eating patterns and exercising enough and, the very basics of that. But it includes things like noble purpose, in other words, understanding your purpose in life and actively pursuing doing meaningful work, as an example. The fact that they formulate clear goals for what we want to achieve in life and actively pursuing them. The way we build quality relationships, as an example. There are many building blocks. In fact, there are about 7 facets that are well researched that contains the full spectrum of employee well-being. And then it's about mindfully building the right habits towards that, because it's easy when you get to age 40 and then these habits are entrenched. I think sometimes people forget when we pick up weight, it sometimes happens through 10 grams per annum, and then when you add 10 years, suddenly it's a kilo. And then after that, it's 5. And before you see again, you're like 15 kilos overweight. So it really comes as a gradual thief in the night almost. And that's where the mindfulness, I think, becomes important, is to practice that through cultivating good well-being habits right from the word go, which makes it easier to sustain the journey. And of course, it enhances your execution capability and your own sustainability, which of course is therefore also beneficial for the organization. So I think that's what I want to say. And don't think that the youth is invincible. I think that is also a fantasy. That's a very common thing, is that, oh no, I'll do this next year, I've got lots of time. I think the advice is that the time goes very quickly and it goes past at an accelerated pace. And before you see it, you're 40 years old, and then you wonder, how did I get here? And then it's very hard to unwind those bad habits we formed over the years. That would be my advice.
So your advice would be to create good, healthy habits.
Right from the word go, cultivate those good habits, but also be mindful of where they come from. In other words, interrogate the mental model and the root causes of why what do we truly believe about our youth and our well-being, and in focusing on that to cultivate it into a positive state and not believe that we are actually invincible and we have lots of time left, because it's very easy to get onto that slippery slope.
Thank you, Ryk. I think I'll definitely take your advice that you would give to yourself. I think I'll definitely start implementing it more often in my life. But thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. It's always fun hearing all the interesting things you have to say. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome, and thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate talking to you. All the best.
Thank you, Ryk.
Bye now.